I didn't acknowledge you. Um, Tonight's class is dedicated by Shelley Higgins in honor of, tell me if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Linda Sam Kaufman. Am I right? Firstly, I'd like to welcome Shelley to our class and to our community of Tanya ladies. We had the honor of meeting Shelley over Rosh Hashanah. We're really excited that she's here to join us. So thank you for sponsoring tonight's class. May the merit of this class benefit you and your loved ones at this very auspicious time of year, Erev Yom Kippur. We concluded chapter 29 last class. I just want to do a quick little recap. In chapter 29, we were talking about spiritual numbness, right? Someone says, I know everything. I'm learning a lot. It's all in my head. I just can't get myself inspired. What do I need to do? And you might think that Tanya says that maybe you need more inspiration, more classes, more rabbis, more learning. But sometimes the truth is that you just need to, what the Tanya describes as splinter the wood. I need to look in the mirror and look at myself really well. And I need to break down my own wood, which the Tanya described as ego. I heard an interesting line. I believe it was coined by Rabbi Shais Taub, where he says ego can be an acronym for edging God out. Tanya specifically describes everything in the world as falling into one of two spheres. It's either godly, God-centered, or self-centered, me-centered, meaning everything in the world that's not shouting godliness and spirituality, it's because it's a focus on me and a focus on self. So if a person is finding that they have a hard time connecting to the other, connecting to God, connecting to something higher, it must be that they're very stuck in themselves. They're very stuck in their own ego, and not necessarily ego the way we think, that they're walking around and being very boastful, but they're in a place where they just feel very complacent and very okay with themselves. And I'm okay, and I know enough, and I do enough. And it creates a certain numbness. Like I don't really need more. I don't need anything more or higher. And that's kind of what chapter 29 was talking about. And the discussion was how do you break this ego, right? What does it mean to splinter the wood? How do I break my ego so that I could be more sensitive to the holy and to the godly? And the Tanya described that we need to disassociate the ego me, the physical natural me, and realign with my truest, deepest essence, which is the godly me. The Tanya described that the me that I associate with is my natural self, right? The world shouts, I'm real. Physicality is real. The paycheck is the most important thing. Business is the most important thing. We don't always feel or sense the godly. And when we look at ourselves, I identify myself as what I do, what I accomplish, how much I accomplish, what goals I get to. What I'm missing is that the truest, deepest me is the godly me. I'm actually a spark of godliness that's enclosed in this physical self. And what I need to do is I need to reconnect with my truest identity. When I chip away at the ego, I can realign myself with my truest, deepest me. This reminds me of a great story about a chassid named Rabbi Mendel Futterfass. Rabbi Mendel Futterfass was put in the Siberian labor camps because he was involved in Jewish life and teaching Torah and being involved in the Jewish community. Now he was in prison with all the people who the communist regime felt were were enemies of the state. So who was there? Philosophers, educators, college professors, anyone who had some kind of sophistication that the communists felt was in opposition to the regime. And when he was there, he described later that most of the people around him were very, very depressed. They were very sad. They felt horrible. I mean, if the communists sentenced someone to be in the Siberian gulags for a bunch of years, you never really know if you were coming home, when you were coming home, what state you were going to come home in. It was a very depressing place to be. And they commented to him that he seemed very okay. He didn't appear so depressed and sad as they were. So in a conversation with them at some point, they asked him, how is it? How is it that you're maintaining your sanity, your happiness? Like you just seem okay. And he said, what you don't realize is that you, let's say as a philosopher or a lecturer, your identity is that you are a philosopher, that you lecture, that you write books, that you have a certain job. That's your whole identity. So as soon as that identity is stripped from you because now you were put in prison, now you're just a person in a labor camp doing hard work in the freezing cold, you don't have an identity to hold on to. And so that's very depressing. He said, for me, my identity always is that I'm a Jew here to serve God. So yesterday I was serving God in Moscow, and today I have to serve God in the labor camps. Obviously, this man was someone who was very much aligned with his godly self. He wasn't caught up in the what I do is what defines me. He understood very well what his true definition was, and he was able to see every moment as if I'm here, that means God wants me to be here, and I have a job to do here. And I'm not doing any less here than I did, in my previous place. So if I were to sum it up from chapter 29, I would say that our deepest, chapter 29 was trying to get us to a place where our truest, deepest identity is our spiritual identity, is a piece of God, realizing that everything else is just a cover, it's just a shadow. And we also mentioned, how do I break this cover? When you encounter like such a darkness, how do you break it? And the Hannah said, you just have to expose it. You have to confront it. When you look at darkness, and you gave that example of the woman who was hired by the king to seduce his son. What does the son have to do to combat this woman? All he has to do is look her in the eye and say, hey, I know who you really are. I know you were sent here by my father. I'm not going to fall for this. When we're able to identify the truth and confront it and be very honest with it and with ourselves, that's how we blast that shell. So when I can look myself in the mirror and say, I know who I really am. I know where I'm really up to. I know I'm not really as great as I think I am. I know that there are things that I do wrong and there are things that I need to grow in, and I could be really honest with myself in that way. That's when the ego is crushed and I'm able to connect to my truest identity. And that's when I will definitely become spiritually sensitive, because naturally we are spiritually sensitive beings, and we lose that sensitivity when we, hang out too much in physicality, when we indulge in physicality. I think that this message is actually so appropriate for this time of year. We're right before Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day of the year where it says the highest level of our soul is revealed on Yom Kippur. Some people think that the power of Yom Kippur is sitting in the synagogue all day. It's beautiful to sit in the synagogue all day, but actually Jewish law says that if a person has an option to either fast, and that means they won't be able to pray because fasting is going to be difficult for them and they're going to have to stay in bed most of the day to fast. And their other option is not to fast, but to be able to attend services. The preferred option is to fast, because the most important part of the day is connecting to the essence of the day, which we do by fasting, not by praying. Obviously, if we can, we try to pray as much as we can, and we would like to attend the synagogue. But the essence of the day is the fact that the deepest and highest level of our soul is revealed. The reason that we don't eat on Yom Kippur is not like other fasts where we're trying to afflict ourselves and, we're trying to, it's a day of pain and sadness. Actually, Yom Kippur is considered a very happy day. It's a solemn day, but it's a happy day. We wish each other good Yom Tov on Yom Kippur. Chag Sameach. Why is that? Because Yom Kippur, there's a joy. I'm connecting to my deepest self. And the reason we don't eat is because we're angelic on this day. The deepest spiritual part of me is not connected to the physical, elements of the world. So I don't wear leather shoes because leather shoes are very much they symbolize the physicality of clothing and physical external wear. We don't eat or drink on Yom Kippur because we're trying to connect to the angel part of us, the deepest soul part of me that's not interested in food, that's just focused on spirituality and godliness. So Yom Kippur is really a day where we're stripping down, splintering our wood so much so we kind of strip away all the outer layers and really connect to the deepest layer. And that's why Yom Kippur is a happy day. And for sure, when Yom Kippur ends, it's a tremendous celebration. It says that when in the times of the temple, when the high priest would emerge from the temple at the end of Yom Kippur, it was a celebration, and they would hold out torches for him, and everybody would escort him back to his house with tremendous celebration, and people would go home and eat a huge feast because it was this joy of, we did it. We connected to our deepest selves, and now we are like the purest, most essential holy selves that we can be. So I thought that was amazing how that tied straight into chapter 29 that we just concluded. Now we're up to chapter 30. Yes, questions. Go ahead, Lisa.
This is a quick question. What does the Tanya say, or God, or the Chabad, about people who are sick or on medication?
So that's a very good question. We go back straight to Jewish law. According to Jewish law, anyone who is able to should fast. Someone who is unable to, and that would be a medical thing, meaning ideally a person should consult with their doctor and their rabbi. And together they make that decision of whether they could or cannot fast. Actually, because Yom Kippur is such a serious fast, Yom Kippur is the only time that there's a concept within the fast called shiurim, meaning if a doctor determines that somebody is not allowed to fast, maybe someone's a diabetic and they must be, eating certain amounts throughout the day, it still doesn't give them a license to completely not fast. Again, they need to talk to their doctor and a rabbi, and they determine, for example, every 2 hours, I need to be eating a certain amount. And other than that, I should be fasting. So we really try to fast as much as we can. Obviously, if we're healthy enough to do that. If a person's not healthy enough to fast at all, even for an hour or 2 or 3, then obviously it's not their mitzvah to fast. You're muted. I can't hear you.
If I decide I don't want to fast because I'm on medication or not healthy or whatever, I have to ask a rabbi or doctor. And what if I don't? What will happen?
What will happen? What will happen if I don't keep Shabbat? What will happen if I don't keep kosher? You want to know what God wants us to do? This is the mitzvah of the day. The mitzvah of the day is to fast. If someone doesn't do it, then maybe next year they'll be ready to do it. But ideally, that is something that we should be striving for. And it is, and I think sometimes my emphasis was that sometimes people overlook it and they say, well, I'd rather go to services and hear the beautiful songs of the cantor and get all inspired, and I'll do that rather than fasting. According to Jewish law and according to the deeper understanding of what this day is, it says it's a day of atonement, right? This is a day that we emerge clean from. What is it that atones? What there's a discussion in Jewish law. What creates the atonement? Is it the praying? So the more I pray, the more forgiven I am? Is it the intensity of the prayer? Like, what exactly is it? And the conclusion is that it's the day itself brings the atonement. So the day of Yom Kippur is such a powerful day. All I have to do is tap into the energy of this day. And the number one way to tap into the energy of the day is to fast, to try to identify with the deeper spiritual side of me. I would say, if someone's not used to fasting, it's too difficult for them. I would say consider even fasting part of Yom Kippur, if that's not something that you're used to doing. Like, someone could take it upon themselves to say, I'm going to fast the night of Yom Kippur. I'm going to fast the morning of Yom Kippur, until lunch. It's such a powerful part of the day then any amount that you can do will help you tap into the essence of this day.
I think that's great advice. Thank you.
Anyone else had thoughts or questions before we go on to chapter 30? Okay, so chapter 30 is a very interesting chapter. You saw I put in the subject line, how not to judge people. It's interesting, I have to point out that chapter 30, I may have mentioned this previously, but the way the Tanya was initially published, it was never intended to be published as a book. The author of the Tanya originally published it as pamphlets. He had all the different chapters in different pamphlets. What happened was that there were many people who were opposed to his writings for various reasons, and pamphlets are very easy to forge. And so people would take the pamphlets and they would rewrite them and they would put in different things into them to make his words sound heretical, and then they could accuse him of being a heretic, God forbid, or of saying things that are against Torah. So it reached a point where he realized he needs to publish it so that it could be very clear what his book is and what it isn't. So he actually collected all his manuscripts, put them together, and organized it as a book to be published. We have a tradition that chapter 30 was not in the original manuscripts, but he added this when he was putting together the manuscripts to create a book. He added 2 chapters. One was chapter 30, and one is chapter 32 that we're going to get to shortly after the holidays. And we can talk about why this may have been, but it's a little bit of a standalone chapter, though it very much connects to what we're talking about. And the topic of chapter 30 is humility. And I would think that if I was going to connect it to the previous chapter, we're talking about working on ourselves, splintering our wood, becoming our better selves, connecting to our inner selves. It's very natural for us to look around and say, yeah, I may not be so great, but I'm not as bad as she is. I'm not as awful as that person. It's a very human emotion and feeling to have. And that's what chapter 30 aims to address. Chapter 30 says we're talking about spiritual sensitivity. We're trying to make ourselves sensitive. So the first thing we said, I have to get rid of my ego so that I am humble in front of God and connected to my true self. I also need to work on my ego around other people, because another way to make myself really spiritually insensitive is to look down at other people. As soon as I look down at other people and I could pat myself on the shoulder and say, well, you see, I do this, that, and the other, he or she doesn't do that. Never mind that that's an awful way of being. It also creates a lack of spiritual sensitivity, because what kind of sensitivity can we have when we're so proud of ourselves and when we're looking down at other people? So that's really what chapter 30, I'm going to read most of it inside because it's pretty straightforward. But chapter 30 basically starts off and says, if I look around and I see other people and it does not seem that they're on the same level as me, and I feel like I have good reason to look down upon them, to judge them. How do I avoid doing that? And a little peek at what the Tanya is going to say. The Tanya is going to say that what we have to do is give a backstory to what the other person's experiencing, and realize that what I'm seeing is only what I'm seeing on the outside, and I do not know at all the battles that this person is facing internally. I do not understand at all the background that they come from. And I know that if I'm really honest with myself, I know that if I would have had the background that they have, and if I would have had the challenges that they have, most likely I would not even be on the level that they are at now. So actually, instead of looking down at them, I need to be very humble in front of them. But we're going to see it in the words of the Tanya. It's definitely in a much more powerful way. Lorraine, you wanted to say something?
So I just had this happen this weekend, and I love that you used the word backstory, because that was exactly what I said to my friend. We were at brunch, and our waitress was not very perky, happy, pleasant. She just was like doing her job. And my friend said, wow, she's in quite a mood, like to be a waitress. And I said, well, you don't know what happened at home this morning before she got to work. You don't know if she has a new baby that kept her up all night. You don't, and I came up with like 16 things that had happened. I created this horrible backstory. Her mother was with us because it was her 90th. And her mother looks at her daughter and she says, or she has 10 tables and she's busy. And it was just like, we just blasted her for looking down on this poor frazzled waitress. And in a second, she said, the next time she came over, the mother said, wow, it's busy in here, isn't it? And the little 20 something's face lit up and she said, you have no idea. It hasn't stopped for the last 3 hours. And she felt so grateful to be seen. And so I love that you use the term backstory, because even if we make up pretend backstories for people, like I didn't know her backstory. I thought of all these creative ideas. Her mother just said, maybe she's just busy. Look around, the place is packed. And sure enough, it was just that she was busy, but it didn't even matter. It's just that she and I were compassionate and empathetic, and the daughter, not so much. And so that's just interesting that you use that term.
So, I mean, it's not my term really, it's from the Tanya, but let's see it inside. Thanks for sharing that. So, one who suffers from Timtum Halev, which we define as spiritual insensitivity, must also set his heart to fulfill the instruction of our sages, be lowly of spirit before every man. So this is a quote from the sages that say you have to be lowly of spirit before every person. And the author of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, is going to look at this and say, wait, it doesn't say act humble in front of every person. It says be humble. So you can't define, you may want to define it and say, yeah, even if you're really better than them, you should act in a way of humility. He says, no, the words are very precise. Be humble. So it's something that it's real. It's something that I need to really, really be able to feel. How can I feel humble in front of every person, especially in front of people who I know are at a lower level than I am? And then he emphasizes a second part of the sentence that says, before every person. Before every person? You mean even that guy? Even that person who I know does such awful things? How am I supposed to be truly humble, be humble in front of people such as those people? And so then it goes on. I'm going to go to the highlighted text. The wording implies be thus and not merely act thus in all sincerity, meaning we have to really be humble in the presence of every man, even in the presence of the most religiously irreverent people. The Tanya calls them kal shebekalim, the most unobservant people, if we had to define it that way. So how's this possible? So the Tanya is now going to explain to us how is it possible. And here's what he's going to say. This can be accomplished by following the instruction of our sages. There's another thing that our sages tell us. The sages tell us, Al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia limkomo. Often translated as, don't judge anyone until you stand in their place. Literally translated as, do not judge your fellow until you have until you've reached their place specifically. And he's going to focus on these words, reach their place. What does it mean to reach their place? First, he says, let's focus on place. Let's focus on environment. So he's addressing now a person who he describes, I think I would probably describe it as the street corner Jew. The street corner Jew. That Jew who's sitting on the street corners and is all exposed to all this nonsense in the world and is doing stuff that don't seem appropriate. So the Tanya says, for starters, look at this person's place. For literally, it is his place, his physical environment that causes him to sin, since his livelihood requires him to go about the marketplace all day, and whenever he is not thus engaged, he is one of those who sits on the street corners. Thus his eyes see all sorts of temptation, and what the eye sees, the heart desires. Tanya says, you're going to compare yourself to that person? That person has to work a job that makes them have to be in places that you would never step foot in. You're sitting here all sheltered in your synagogue, in your religious community, in your Eruv, in your whatever you want to describe it, and you're going to sit here and now judge that person? Have you been exposed to what that person's exposed to? Do you have to go to the kind of places that this person goes to? Do you have to see the things that this person sees? If you're not to judge a person until you're in their place, until you physically have to live a life where you have to be in the same places that they are, you can't judge them. We could take this further to say, have you lived with a mother-in-law like they do? Do you have to live with their spouse? Do you have to have the neighbors that they have? Do you have the boss that he or she has? Like, we could take this further and really think of all the different environmental factors that affect people. Now, the Tanya is going to be very quick to tell us that this is not an excuse to that person. That person cannot then be excused and say, well, sorry, God, because I live this kind of lifestyle, I can't help it. That's not okay. They're fully responsible for their actions. But that's on them. My view of them has to be, I'm not in their place. I don't live that kind of lifestyle. I didn't grow up in that kind of household. I didn't have those influences in my life. And I really, truthfully cannot judge what they're going through and what's causing them to act the way that they're acting. Additionally, it may be his spiritual place. After we go through all the environmental factors that could be affecting the way that person's behaving, the author of the Tanya says, people have different spiritual natures. And the description here is cute. It says, it may be a spiritual place, the nature of his evil impulse that leads him to sin. His evil nature burns like a baker's fiery oven, which is heated with greater frequency and intensity than a domestic oven. As it is written, Hosea burns like a flaming fire. Different people have different passions. It's like, I heard someone describe this with a cute terminology. Let's see if I can remember it. 1 second. Oh, so I was listening to a Tanya class, and someone said, think of the heated youngster in Las Vegas. 19-year-old guy living in Las Vegas has very, very, very passionate desires for a lot of sinful things. And now they're in this environment. Can I judge them? Maybe I'm the real, brainy type who just likes to read books. I never had desires for those kind of things. I mean, realistically, we all have desires for different things. Some people are very tempted by, really strong temptations, and some people have different kind of temptations. Some people, their biggest temptation is, like I said, to take out a few extra library books, to spend some more time studying. We're all created differently. So realizing that a person has a different nature that attracts them to different things will also make me realize that I can't judge. What if that person has a really, they have some difficult relationship with money, and that makes it very tempting for them to be dishonest. Again, we're not saying it's okay what they're doing. What they're doing is not okay. But for me to judge them when I don't have the same kind of passions, inclinations, or desires, I can't do that. I'm not in their place. It is different, however, with he who goes out but a little in the marketplace, and most of the day he's home rather than at the street corners, and therefore he encounters less temptation. Maybe I'm lucky that I just have to work a computer job and I just have to sit here and write a bunch of emails. I don't have to go and, walk into these different stores and bars to sell my stuff. And so I'm not exposed to the same things that this person's exposed to. And even if he does go about in the marketplace all day so that his physical place is the same, maybe I do have the same kind of job. It may be that his spiritual place is different so that he is not so passionate by nature, and therefore not so greatly tempted by the sights of the marketplace. For the evil impulse is not the same in everyone. One person's nature may be more passionate than the others, and the others less so, as explained elsewhere. So now, of course, there's a disclaimer. The Tanya says, we have to make it very clear this person has no excuse for what they're doing. In truth, even he who is extremely passionate by nature and whose livelihood obliges him to sit all day in the street corners has no excuse whatsoever for his sins. He is termed a Rasha Gamor. This is the Tanya's definition of a Rasha, not necessarily evil, but someone who's failing, struggling to do the right thing, for not having the dread of God before his eyes. This person will have to pass judgment for what they're doing, for making the wrong decisions. For he should have controlled himself and restrained the feelings of desire in his heart because of the fear of God who sees all actions. But that's not my business. My business is that when I look at this person, I need to say, I don't have the same kind of desires he or she has. I don't have the same kind of circumstances. I don't have the same kind of background. I don't have the same level of education. There's no way that I can judge what this person is doing. And even more so, the Tanya takes it a step further. Not only can I not judge them, but when I start looking at them in this way, I'm going to start realizing that actually, for them to behave the way they're behaving might take more effort than for me to behave the way that I'm behaving. When was the last time I had to work so hard? Let's say I look at someone, perhaps I'm someone who keeps Shabbat fully every week. I've been doing it my whole life. It's no big deal for me. And I look at someone who doesn't keep Shabbat, but, before the party, I'm talking, college students, that's our common experience. College student, before she goes to the bar on Friday night, she takes 5 minutes to light her Shabbat candles. I could say, what? That's what you're going to do? You're going to go and just light Shabbat candles, then go to the bar for Shabbat? How could you? Or I could look at it differently and say, can you imagine how much effort goes for this girl who didn't grow up keeping Shabbat, who's not in an environment where anyone else keeps Shabbat, who's in an environment where there's a lot of pressure to go to the bar, but she's going to take time to go and light her Shabbat candles for 5 minutes on a Friday night. Did I ever invest that kind of effort into my Shabbat observance? Probably my entire 24-hour, 25-hour Shabbat is not nearly as hard for me as those 5 minutes are for her. Therefore, every man ought to weigh and examine his own position according to the standards of his place and rank in divine service, as to whether he serves God in a situation requiring comparable struggle in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and a test as the Kal Shebekalim. Do I ever have to work as hard as this particular person is working? And now it's going to take it even further. A person might say, yeah, but come on, I never do any of those bad things. Maybe I actually never transgress any of the commandments. Tanya says, still, you're supposed to be putting in a lot of effort into serving God. So maybe you're doing all the right things. Are you putting in as much passion and effort as that person is putting to do the little bit that they're doing? Maybe this person, to do the little bit that they're doing, is working so hard. Did you pray today? Oh, very nice that you prayed today. How much effort did you put into your prayer? How hard was it for you to pray? How much effort and thought did you put into that mitzvah that you did, into that blessing that you made? At the end of the day, a person is judged by who they are, by their place, by their background, by them doing their very best. In the realm of do good, in the service of prayer with devotion, for example, a person must battle their evil inclination daily in order to pour out his soul before God with his entire strength. A person can never say, I do everything. I check all the boxes. I do all the mitzvahs. There's nothing more for me to really grow in. No, you're supposed to be putting effort into it. When was the last time that you went and put effort in? And it goes into detail, into your morning prayers, into your evening prayers, into your blessing, into all the different good things that you're doing. How hard are you actually working to do them? This reminds me of a story. I think we just shared it. We must have just shared it on Shabbos at my house because it's very fresh, but it's worth sharing. I believe the story is told by Rabbi Breitowitz. He's a rabbi in Jerusalem. And he's very well known, and he has a lot of rabbis who consult with him. And he said he once got a call from a rabbi who needed help figuring out how to respond to a student. So what was the question? He said, well, I advise in a youth group, and I have this young Jewish teen girl who came to ask me a question. And she said that she learned about Shabbat candles and she really wants to try to light Shabbat candles. But her parents will have none of it. They really do not want to see their daughter becoming observant in any way. They do not allow her to light Shabbat candles in her house. So she found a way around it. She realized that if she stays up late on Friday night, after her parents go to sleep, she could go into her bathroom where she keeps, scented candles, and she can light a scented candle in her bathroom and make the blessing there. But she thinks that there may be a problem with making a blessing in a bathroom. So she called the rabbi to find out, am I allowed to make a blessing on the candle in my bathroom? And so this rabbi, called up, I believe this is how the story goes. He called up Rabbi Breitowitz to ask him his opinion. And Rabbi Breitowitz said he said he thought about the question and it just made him want to cry. He says, how do you even answer this kind of question? I mean, just for those who may not understand, for someone to light a candle late Friday night in a bathroom and make a blessing, there are numerous issues with that. For starters, if she's lighting it late Friday night, it's already Shabbat. We don't light candles on Shabbat. So actually lighting a candle at that point is violating Shabbat. It's not honoring Shabbat. Blessings are not made in a bathroom. Again, there are multiple issues here. But he said he couldn't even come up with an answer. He says, how do you answer? Who can answer a question like that? Look at this girl with such tremendous innocence, with such a strong desire to do the right thing. It would take such a, again, I feel like this is where you see where this chapter is trying to develop our sensitivity. If I look down at someone else who's not at the same level that I am, that means I've lost my sensitivity. If I start thinking, when I look at someone else and I start thinking, wow, can you imagine how much effort they must be putting to look this good, to reach this level? Can you imagine how hard it is for them to do what it is that they're doing? It makes you sensitive. It humbles you. It makes you spiritually in tune and connected. It's only when I walk around judging others and saying, oh, they don't do it so good. And how could she think she's celebrating Shabbat that way? And who does he think he is to do it? When I look at people that way, that's like a sure recipe to become spiritually desensitized. You want to be sensitive, you have to start looking at people in a way that you are humble before them. Not you act humble, you literally feel humble. When I hear the story of this girl, I feel humble before her. When in the world did I ever have to work so hard to figure out how to light Shabbat candles? It's like, hats off to her. And that's what I think is the powerful message of this chapter. If I want to figure, if we're going to answer the question we put in the email subject, how to not judge people, when I find myself judging people, I need to stop and say, wait a second, I don't know their background. I don't know their challenges. I don't know their inclinations, their passions, their nature, their inner battles, their outer battles, with the home they're living in, the background they were raised with. And of course, when we talk about Jewish observance specifically, I mean, we all come from such different backgrounds. Who are we to start judging people and saying this is actually, it's interesting. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was very opposed to the term kiruv rechokim. It's a term that's commonly used in the Orthodox world to talk about teaching, doing outreach, and finding Jews who are not observant and teaching them about Torah and Judaism. And the Rebbe rejected the term very clearly, because the term, if you translate it, means kiruv rechokim, means bringing close those who are far. The Rebbe said, you're going to label Jews as far? You're going to label yourself as close? What? Who? It's only God's the only judge. When we look at other people, we need to have complete and total humility. And to the extent that when I see the other person, I should say, wow, if I had her challenges, I would have looked much worse. There's no way I would have been able to do what she does or what he does under those circumstances. Yes, Harriet.
So there's also the flip side of that, of our judging ourselves related to people who are like when I moved to Dallas and all of my family are keep kosher and are different levels from very orthodox to conservative, that I thought they were judging me because I wasn't. And it stopped me for a long time in terms of my own spiritual growth because they weren't judging me. I was judging myself in terms of my own practices. And and when I finally quit judging myself and could see what they were doing and appreciate what they were doing and where they were coming from, then I was able to start on a different spiritual growth process. So it was kind of the flip of I could appreciate others, but it was not appreciating my own how I got to where I was on my own spiritual path.
So I'm happy that you brought that up because it's interesting that chapter 31, the next chapter, is going to kind of be a natural flow from this one, but it's going to take it to the other extreme. If I'm busy feeling so humble in front of everyone else, that might make me feel really sad and really depressed. So how do I feel humble without feeling sad? How do I find that, that balance of being able to be humble and yet have it's interesting. I find that in our society today, humble is almost like a bad word. Everyone talks about self-care and pat yourself on the back and you're doing great. And, it's no one likes to talk about, you know, speaking down to yourself or of yourself. We're always being told to, inflate ourselves. I remember reading a study. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but they say that um, young Americans, like in their 20s or so, they don't rank very high in international comparisons of math and science scores. Unfortunately, American kids don't rank so high. But you know what we rank very, very high in? Startups and self-esteem overall compared to other cultures. Because one thing our culture has definitely, pumped us up with is you could do it. You're the best. What do they call it? The attendance award. Like you came to school every day. Yay. So it's a different language that the Tanya's speaking, where the Tanya's saying to be humble, but it needs to be clarified. The Tanya's not saying bash yourself. It's not saying walk around feeling sad about yourself. Just be honest with yourself. Learn to look at yourself and say, I know who I am. I know what I could be. And I'm working hard to be the best that I can be. I'm not more than I can be. I'm not better than someone else. I have different circumstances than someone else. Like the famous story of Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli. It's been said many times, but it's always worth repeating. Rabbi Zusha, before he passed away, he was crying. And his students asked him, why are you crying? He says, when I get up there, after, when my life is over, I get up there, I'm not worried about them asking me why I wasn't like Moses. Because I could just say, I'm not Moses. And why wasn't I like this one? I'm not him. But what I am worried is that they're going to ask me, why weren't you like Zusha? Because why didn't you live up to your best potential? Being very honest with ourselves, that's what the Tanya demands. Look myself in the eye, look in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I know where I'm coming from. Am I growing? Am I doing the best I can? Is there better that I can do, regardless of where I am? And of course, never comparing to others. If I'm going to compare to others, that should just bring me to greater humility, because I should say, wow, I'm not working as hard as he is or as hard as she is. Sarah.
Okay, beware, I'm about to use a word twice, so it's going to be a little funky, so I apologize in advance. Okay, I think there is an assumption that we're assuming things, and
Okay.
sometimes that can get confusing because, again, we're assuming we must be judging in that case. I'll give you a really good example. I didn't realize, I didn't put the two together until recently. I've been bumping into Arlene every pre Rosh Hashanah at the cemetery because my father is buried there. And there is a ceremony to say a very specific prayer before Rosh Hashanah called Kever Avot, right at the um, uh, burial of the at the cemetery. And so I've been going there, and I remember looking around and I'm going, how are there only like 10 people here? Isn't Dallas like a huge Jewish community? Like, where is everybody? And I remember asking Rabbi Wolk, where are all the people? Like, where are all the Jews at? Like, what's going on? Year after year, I'm always here, and I know like there's more than 10 people. Where is everybody? And I think it came across as judgmental. Meanwhile, I am genuinely asking, like, is this something that people don't know about? Is this something that, because I only learned about it after the fact, I didn't know about it. So again, I think there's an assumption that you're assuming that I'm judging. And Rabbi Wolk told me, well, it's just a custom that you should go to, your parents' burial site right before Rosh Hashanah. What if they're not buried here? What if they're in New York, or what if they're elsewhere, or whatever? And I said, okay, but I mean, I chose to bury my father here so that I could become, local. I can come by anytime. Only then did I learn, after the fact, there's this custom. Oh, before Rosh Hashanah, I could go say this. I didn't know. Meaning, I learned after the fact that there was this Erev Rosh Hashanah prayer. I wasn't judging. I felt like I was coming from, and I'm not blaming Rabbi Wolk. I'm just saying, like, you could look at a situation where you're making the assumption that somebody is making a judgment. And meanwhile, I felt like there's so much that, like, there's customs that people do, and there is, I don't know how you say it, misora, like a tradition maybe, that like some people eat beans and rice on Passover, and there's different things that maybe it's a genuine question that people are asking because they don't know. And I don't think that that's a place of judgment per se. And I think that it comes across as judgmental. And I think that we need to give people some grains of salt and grace that allow people to ask questions without jumping on them. Oh, you're so judgmental. Not every time is that a judgmental situation.
100%. I'm happy you brought that up, but I feel like it fits right in because Tanya is not telling us to judge other people for being judgmental. If anything, I could apply the same principle when I see someone and I think that person's being judgmental. Instead of saying, oh my goodness, how could you be so judgmental? I should probably say, well, I wonder, she probably doesn't know. She's probably genuinely curious. This is maybe the first time they've seen this thing. It's not telling us to judge other people for being judgmental. It's telling us, how do we avoid being judgmental? How do I avoid? It's so natural for me if I am, Miss Loving Kindness, and I'm always driving around and dropping off packages for all the homeless people on the street corners, and I see someone else just, I know I took that from Lorraine.
I was thinking that. I just did not want to say it out
Lorraine
loud.
sees someone else just driving by and
I
ignoring
love
the
that you
homeless,
just gave me the nickname Miss Loving Kindness. I'm going to keep that one. T-shirt
if
being
Lorraine
printed.
sees someone else just whizzing by and not stopping for the homeless, and who knows, she might even see a huge pile of granola bars in this woman's front seat, it would be very natural for her to say, well, you know, yeah, well, at least I stop for all the homeless people, and some people don't. And the Tanya's saying, no, don't fall into that trap. That's just going to make you extremely spiritually insensitive. Really, what you should be saying is, I don't know. Maybe she's in a rush. Maybe she has an emergency. Maybe, you can create stories, or you can just remind yourself that you don't know what someone's going through. Maybe this is the only food she has. Maybe this is something she's selling. Whatever it is, we need to tell ourselves backstories about other people to stop us from judging them. And then beyond that, the Tanya says, I need to then look back at myself and say, am I working as hard as she is to do whatever it is that I'm doing? Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, but I think that second part is what I was honing in on, is that assumption is, you know, I have no problem putting, you know, finger to the pulse. Are you reflecting inwards and looking at yourself as opposed to looking elsewhere, and, you know, you know, fix yourself first before you fix others, right? So that's what is it, Michelet, I think. You know, that makes sense, and I understand that idea that you have to look internally, but unfortunately that's not the way our society will work. And in fact, most, air quotes, curative organizations don't do that, short of Chabad, of course. That's not the norm. Everybody is going out to look elsewhere and look at other people and tell people what you're wearing and what you're not wearing, and, you know, whether it's outwardly saying it or just the one up, looking up and looking down, you know, nonverbal communication, it is done whether we are conscious or not conscious about it.
Well,
It's
we need
done
more
all the
people to
time.
study Tanya and to realize that
Amen.
humility is key. Humility is key. The Tanya talks about humility so much. It's like you can't serve God without being humble. Humble before God and humble before other people. Because otherwise, I'm just serving myself. Yeah, Jerry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that part of the issue of humility is appreciating that whatever position we are in, whatever we recognize of the good that we can do, has to come with gratitude that we have the ability to do it. You know, for instance, if we're giving tzedakah, we thank God that we have the means to be able to give to others, you know, and that we're not in need ourselves. And you know, so that, and that also takes away the aspect of sadness, I think, when you tie whatever goodness you have to the fact that God has enabled you to be able to do this good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to read one quote here that's going to kind of remind us how far we need to take this, that not just not to judge others, but when we start feeling judgment of others, how we could just flip it right back on ourselves. This is towards the end of the chapter. It says, for example, he may find, meaning a person may find about himself, that he or she does not summon up the strength to stop in middle of a pleasant gossip or middle of relating a tale discrediting his fellow, as he ought to do, even if it is a very slight slur, or even if it be true, and even though its purpose is relating it to exonerate oneself. Meaning, when I see someone else doing something and I say, huh, how could she, you know, the Tanya says, flip it back on yourself. When was the last time you really worked hard to stop yourself from doing something wrong? Like, then this is a very common thing that I believe most of us experience at some point or another. We're in the middle of a very nice conversation and it turns a little bit juicy and a little bit gossipy. And we suddenly catch ourselves that we start thinking, wait, is this like gossip? I probably should stop right here. But oh my, this is like a really good piece of gossip. Am I just really going to stop and say, hey guys, I'm stopping the conversation? Or do I quickly in my mind try to justify, well, you know, we're saying this, we're kind of trying to help her. We all really have her best interest in mind. We're going to say this so that we all learn to be. And suddenly I'm telling myself tales instead of stopping. And this, the Tanya says, that's an example of where I could, when I find myself judging someone else, I should turn back and say, oh yeah, when was the last time I worked so hard to really do the right thing? Likely, I can use some improvement in my own behavior, whether, again, for some it's prayer, for some it's gossip, for some it's, you know, other things, but I could find areas in my life that there's no way I am working as hard as this particular person is to do what it is that they're doing. And so at this point, not only am I not going to judge them, but I'm turning it back on me to make myself feel truly humble in front of this other person. I'm just going to go to one quote at the end, which I just thought was a beautiful quote. We've said it a few times, but it's nice to see it in the words of the Tanya. Therefore, our sages declared in regard to the illiterate, specifically speaking about people who have not studied Torah and are not well versed in Jewish law, that deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts, since they are not aware of the gravity of their sins. When God is looking down and judging people, somebody who knows what the right thing is and chooses to do the wrong thing is judged very differently than someone who literally doesn't know and is doing something wrong. Because if they don't know, they don't know. God judges them very differently. With a scholar, the reverse is true. An oversight due to lack of study is judged as being grave as deliberate sins. Someone who is a scholar and should be studying more and should know more. Again, God judges that differently. But I found this line at the end of this chapter very powerful, where the Tanya is reminding us, judging is not my job. It's not your job. There's one God, and he's the only judge, and he judges us, and we pass the day of judgment, Rosh Hashanah. We're heading towards Yom Kippur. It's God's business alone to judge. And when I look at other people and see the things that they do wrong, the only reaction that I should have is that I should feel humble. I should remind myself that I really, really don't know what's going on with this person. And I probably am not working nearly as hard as this particular person to be at I'm not working as hard as they are working to be at the level that they are at. This reminds me of a story. Somebody wrote a letter, a very long letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe describing all of the terrible things they have going on in their life and how their life is so difficult. And I'm having a really hard time with this, and I'm having a really hard time with that, and I really struggle with this, and I really can't do that. A whole long letter. And in the later years, the Rebbe would get so much mail that many times the response, instead of writing a separate typed up response, the Rebbe would kind of write a response on the actual paper and mail it back. So in this case, the Rebbe circled the first word of every sentence. I. And the Rebbe wrote at the bottom, this might be the source of your problem. Meaning this person was obviously so focused on self and so lacking in humility, the life felt miserable. And I think, building on what Jerry said, when we learn to live a life of humility, a life when we look up at other people and we don't get stuck in our ego, and we allow ourselves to be spiritually attuned and spiritually open and sensitive, it's a much happier life. It's a much happier life. It's a life when we feel like we allow the energy to flow through us and we really feel connected. I wanted to end with a Yom Kippur story, but we're already over time. So if anyone has to go, we understand. Have an easy fast and a Gemar Chatzima Tova. If anyone wants to stay on, I'll share a quick story about Yom Kippur.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes,
what
of course,
you
of
and
course.
Sarah were talking about before you move on to the next subject?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So that was a really in my face example, because I've never heard that you're supposed to go. I mean, my parents have only been gone for a year, but I've never heard what Sarah was saying. So I'm sitting there going, okay, well, I missed that one. What is that one? And why, in what I have learned in 60 plus years, why has that never been spoken? And so this is totally offline. So if one of the two of you could send me the prayer, I can drive and I can say the transliteration or whatever. Clearly, I missed the shot to do it with, a group of people, but I've never even heard of it. So there you go. Sarah's
just
example.
in general,
Sarah's
Lorraine,
example right there happening in real time.
Lorraine, just briefly, it's customary before the high holy days, before Rosh Hashanah, we go and implore at the graves of the righteous and the graves of the previous generation. So people who go to the graves of their parents and their grandparents, and people also go to, this is a time where many people go to graves of righteous people to implore the souls of these generations to awaken mercy for us. The day of judgment is coming, and we're asking that they put in a good word for us. So that's been a Jewish custom for many years. Some people do it as a group, as a whole. They'll go with the rabbi and they'll, say it like Sarah described. And some people just go on their own and recite some psalms and make it an annual visit.
Yeah,
Arlene, you share something?
and yeah, I just wanted to say that the reason that I go is because my family is in New York. And so I can't visit their graves. And so I feel like being with Rabbi Woke and being in the company of other people saying the prayers is the best I can do. But truly, if I were able to go visit their graves independently, that's probably what I would do. I wouldn't, I wouldn't feel the need to do what I do.
Jerry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, Arlene, if you, my parents are buried in New York also, and so when I light Yortzeit candles on Erev Yom Kippur, that's the closest that I can do to it,
Yeah.
bringing them to closer to me and, respecting the tradition of honoring them. And I light Yortzeit candles for them and for my grandparents.
Yeah, and but sometimes I can almost see, how certain religions people have shrines in their homes where they have a picture and I miss very much being able to go physically, to just, I mean, you're not in their presence actually, but it's just something that I wish I could experience. I'll go with my friend who is also at Rabbi Woke's, and I'll visit her mom's grave and whatever, and you go and visit others. But yeah, it's something that I wish that I could do, and I feel like this is the closest I could come to doing that.
Thank you for sharing that. So a quick story about Yom Kippur, just 'cause we were talking about Yom Kippur is the day that the highest level within our soul is revealed. Actually, the highest point of Yom Kippur is the tail end. If someone was going to choose one part to go to services for, I would say try to go to the very, very end of the Yom Kippur prayers. It says that during the prayer of Ne'ilah, which is the fifth prayer, the yechida of our soul, the highest level of our soul, is fully revealed. It's a very, very powerful moment. So this story that I think about every year at, right around the Ne'ilah prayer, it's a story told about a group of Cantonists. Now, for those who may not be familiar, I believe it was the early 1800s, Tsar Nikolai I, hope I'm not mixing up the facts. Yeah, Tsar Nikolai I, he had a rule that he would conscript young boys to the Russian army. They would take young children away from their families, and they would keep them in the army for 25 years before letting them go home. And of course, they came after the Jewish kids, and they would go into the Jewish villages, and all the parents would quickly hide their children of this terrible fear of their children being found. And quite a few children were found and were taken to the army. Now, these children became known as the Cantonists. Those who did survive, many of them, the physical harshness of war and being in the army, they didn't physically survive. Many of them survived physically, but totally forgot. They were taken at such a young age. After 25 years, they completely forgot their true identity. Many of them did remember, though. They knew that they were Jewish, and they held on to this identity. But after 25 years of being away from home and away from the Jewish community and away from any kind of Jewish life, they were so beaten emotionally and spiritually. They really they weren't able to join the community again. They just weren't able to. They were so different. They had been through such difficult experiences that they just couldn't mesh back into the Jewish community. So many of them formed communities of their own, and they had these communities of ex-Cantonists, so to speak. Many of them were single. They were like so broken and shattered. They couldn't even marry and start families. Like they had just been through such torturous experiences. So the story is told about a man named Rabbi Mordechai. Rabbi Mordechai was sent by, I believe it was the third Chabad Rebbe. So this was in the late 1700s. So the Cantonists must have been in the early 1700s. So this man, Rabbi Mordechai, was sent by the Rebbe to travel through the countryside and find communities of Jews and bring them strength and inspiration. And that's what he did. He would, he spent his time traveling through the different villages and towns and finding Jewish communities. Anyway, he arrived at a certain city. He made a plan that for Yom Kippur, he's going to arrive at the city so he'll be able to pray with the Jews of that city. And when he came to the city right before Yom Kippur, he couldn't find any of the Jews. And he was told that, oh, you don't know, there's a tradition in the city that all the Jews travel to the even bigger city for Yom Kippur because everyone wants to pray in the really big synagogue. So there were no Jews around. There wasn't even going to be a minyan for Yom Kippur. So he's stuck. It's right before Yom Kippur. Like, what's he going to do? He wants to at least be able to pray in a shul with a minyan of Jews. So he was told that your best bet is if you travel about an hour and a half, east of here, there's a small community of Cantonists. They have their own community. They have their own shul. That's the closest you'll get to having a shul for Yom Kippur. So he didn't have a choice, and that's what he did. He traveled to this community of Cantonists, and he showed up right before Yom Kippur, and the guys all, lined up, and they shook his hand, and they welcomed him, and they said, "You're a rabbi. We'd like to invite you to lead the Yom Kippur services. We're going into Yom Kippur. Usually we do it ourselves. Can you lead the services for us?" He said, "Sure, I'm happy to lead the services." They said, "But we have one condition. When it comes to the Ne'ilah prayer, that fifth prayer, that we have our own way of doing it. So one of us is going to lead it." So, okay, this was a strange request, but if that's what you guys want, then that's what we'll do. So he said it was just so powerful standing in the presence of such people who had suffered so much in their lives. He said the prayers felt different. Like he felt he had never been able to pray as deeply and meaningfully as he did that year. And they went through all the prayers. This was the night, Kol Nidre, and then the morning prayers and the afternoon prayers. And finally, it comes to the fifth prayer. It comes to Ne'ilah, and he went to sit in the back. And he said, "I'm going to watch and see what happens. Let's see how they lead this." And so one of the Cantonists stood up. He goes to the front of the shul, and he gets ready to start the prayers, and he starts unbuttoning his shirt. And Rav Mordechai is watching, and he wanted to say something like, "You're in a shul, like this is not respectful, Yom Kippur." But he bit his tongue, and he watched the guy unbutton his shirt, take off his shirt, and he saw that his back was full of scars from all the beatings he had been through. And you literally saw him wearing the marks of his torture on his body. And the Jew stood up there, and he said, I just want to find the quote. He stood up and he said, "God, Hashem, I'm turning to you. Please send us Mashiach. Bring us the final redemption." He says, "I'm not asking for the sake of our families." If you're familiar in the Avinu Malkeinu, we say, do it for the sake of the children, for the sake, like we have a whole list of who God should save us for in the merit of. So he says, "God, redeem us, not for the sake of our families, because none of us have families." He says, "I'm not asking for the sake of our futures, because unfortunately, we don't really have futures." He said, "I'm not asking for the sake of our livelihood. I'm not asking for comfort. I'm not asking for our children. I'm not asking for our reputations, because we have none of those. All we're asking is," and he quoted the words from Avinu Malkeinu, "Aseh leman shemecha." Do it for your sake. Do it for your sake. What I show you now, this is what we have been through for your sake, just to uphold your name. God, do it for your sake. And with that, he put his shirt back on, he buttoned it up, and they began to pray the Ne'ilah prayer. I find this story particularly touching, as it's a reminder, like we get to that high point of Yom Kippur. If we worked all these, Elul first, and then Rosh Hashanah, and we're preparing for Yom Kippur, and we come to Yom Kippur, we're saying Yom Kippur, it's like our soul is exposed. We've kind of relinquished all the external layers that we have. And especially for those who are fasting, by the time you get to the 24th, 25th hour of the fast, you really feel a little bit angelic. I don't know if because you're partially fainting or because you're so hungry. Like there's something in the air that you just feel like you're in a different world already. And you remember at that point how much Jews have given up just for the sake of God, and how deeply connected we are as Jews to our soul, and how we have this passionate, burning soul inside of us that we just have to reveal. And if we could just tap into that when we get to that end of Yom Kippur, it's, you know, it's powerful. It's literally souls on fire. And of course, it culminates with the blast of the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. And it's in Chabad, we have the tradition that at the end of Yom Kippur, there's a special song that we sing. After, at the very end, after the last prayer is said, we sing a Hasidic tune, Hasidic melody, and it's called Napoleon's March. And it actually was taken from a military march that Napoleon would have his soldiers sing on the way to battle. It was a march of victory. It's like a very lively, very victorious march. And we sing that at the end of Yom Kippur to highlight that that's it. We're in this. We won. We're good. We're pure. We're on a high. We're ready to conquer the world. And we're ready to, you know, we're at the climax of the relationship with God that we could possibly have. So with that, I want to wish everybody a very meaningful Yom Kippur, wherever and however you mark it. Should be the last Yom Kippur we ever have to experience in exile. And even before Yom Kippur, we should hear good news of our hostages coming home and the end of this awful war and the end of this darkness of exile, because we need a better year
Amen.
coming up.
Amen.
Amen.
Mar Chatima Tova, Shana Tova.
Amen.
Damien,
Shana Tova. Thank you.
Yeah, see you
I
in
just
2 weeks.
wanted
Thanks,
Tova.
Lisa.
I just wanted to say that I thought this chapter was so important. Um, you know, just to this world, if people would only see other people. It's like, in order to be empathetic, I mean, it's just if you would just see another person and consider them as a person unto themselves and consider their circumstances, what a different world this would be. This
Absolutely.
is really, I thought, a really important chapter.
Yeah, fully agree with you there.
Yeah.
Good night. Have a great week and Chag Sameach.